Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Taylor. I'm the Technical Marketing Manager for Civil Survey Solutions based in Sydney. And I'm your host today for the webcast for alignments and profiles. When I say host, I'm not actually presenting. I'm going to be introducing you to Terry. Terry, you on the line?
Yes. How are you, JT?
Very good, Terry. Yeah, so Terry's based in our WA office in Perth. And he'll be presenting to you today on Civil 3D alignments and profiles. Most recently, he's been involved with a lot of the heavy lifting part of the Civil 3D aspects within the business. So he's well primed to be able to present this webcast. So Terry, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, JT. To give you the nuts and bolts on this presentation, it's going to be on alignments which are as you can read, the main horizontal controls in Civil 3D. You can navigate the corridor using the alignment and then control the vertical element with the profile. The profile will belong to the alignment, so you can navigate the different elements of the corridor using these tools. All right, I might go into the next slide. This will be our workflow today. We're going to be working through the basic alignment tools. We're going to be drilling down a little bit deeper into some of the elements that you may not use in your day-to-day operations. Most commonly used is the alignment from Polyline method, but we'll be drilling down into a bit more of the Civil 3D tools, just so that you're aware of what's happening and so you can make some more edits to your alignments if you want, using the Civil 3D tools. From there, we're going to use the panorama, make some edits, look at a profile. I like to typically include a surface or the surveyed surface when I'm viewing a profile, just to give some context. Most commonly the method used. We're going to edit some of the bands on those profiles. Very difficult to try and get these right. There's a lot of styles within styles. So once you've got one set up, then save that styles or save that set of styles, and then you can just import that method in the future, and you don't have to redo this process every time. It's like a one-off. Once you have it set, then you'll be good to go for output. We're going to use some of the more automated Civil 3D tools as well. So we're going to be using offset alignments, managing that widening, and also connected alignments, which is the Curvature tool in Civil Site Design, in Civil 3D. Similar, I guess, to Civil Site Design automation.
And Terry, I suppose it's safe to say that, you know, as much as the webcast has sort of been advertised as two separate elements, what you're trying to do is basically amalgamate the two things together. So it's not just a case of, hey, here's alignments and here's profiles.
Yes, unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, you can't separate the two. Really, you can't talk about alignments without talking about profiles. Well, it certainly can't talk about profiles without talking about alignments, as some of these elements are joined at the hip. And if you don't do some of the profile tools in the alignment creation, for example, in the offset alignments, then it'll be very difficult to create the profile if you don't manage your alignment creation properly. So definitely the two are joined. There's also elements which link into the corridors, but I'll leave that for a future webinar. We're just going to be dealing with alignments and profiles today. I don't think we'll have much time left over at the end to squeeze in more information.
No.
Okay, so the next slide will show you, this is basically some of the things to consider when you're building your alignments and profiles. We'll be covering these today, so it's going to be design criteria, the free, floating or fixed, the conundrum or the riddle that is navigating some of those. The description is a little bit confusing, so we'll be hopefully shining a bit of light on that confusion and clarifying which ones to use in which environment and what you get when you choose one of those options. Obviously, managing tendencies is very relevant for your alignments. We want to control our tangency and disable it if we don't want it. We basically be in control of that of that element of the design. Profile band presets. For this, this is what I was talking about before with the profiles and the vertical elements. Having these preset will save you a mountain of time. There's a lot of functionality in the Civil 3D long sections or the profile views, which means that therefore there's a lot of controls that you have to navigate. So the flip side of having absolute control is having to set up a lot of settings and a lot of styles. But once that's done, you can save those styles away, and you're good to go. Other than that, we've got a few automation elements which will include static or interactive profiles. There's certain methods to bring profiles into a profile view which are static and some which are dynamic. So you want to make sure that you're getting the right type of, or using the right method to get the desired outcome, being static or dynamic. Okay, so with that.
Fantastic. Terry, I'm going to make you the host. So you're presenting.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so we'll kick off with the basic alignment tools. Up here in the Home tab in Civil 3D. Normally we would jump down and grab one from our objects. We'll be covering that one a little bit later. We'll start with the hard stuff first. Dinner before dessert. So alignment creation tools. We'll jump into this form. I'll just walk through some of these entries. So naming the alignment, pretty straightforward. What you might not be aware of is at the end you've often got this next counter. You can modify or control that using this entry here. At the moment, there's only the next counter option, but when we get into things like profiles and more complex elements, such as offset profiles, or offset alignments, this will include other fields such as the parent profile name and things like that, which side it's on, what the offset is, those sort of variables. So this is where you would interact with the automated naming conventions, and you can insert the next counter. There's already a next counter there, so I could remove that, and if there was one here I wanted to put in next counter, then I insert that, and that puts that in. You can see here that I've already got some, so I could start that number at, I think we'd be up to 3, but you can change the starting number, increment number if you wanted to go in batches of 10, etc. So you can modify that here. I'm just going to call this one demo. Okay, so there's different types of alignments, different types, other than categorizing them differently in the tool space, which we'll have a look at in a minute. You can also get different functionality depending on which entry you put in. I can show you some of the differences between centerline, offset, and curvature. I don't have any rail in this demonstration. I'll just cancel out of that and we'll come back just to give you an idea. If I click on a centerline and look in the properties, you'll see here I've got these tabs at the top when I'm editing the properties of this centerline type. So then I come down to offset and you'll see that I get offset parameters. Obviously this won't have any because it's a centerline, not an offset. And you get different options available depending on the type. So it's not just where it files it away, but you actually do get different functionality. So if I was to click on an offset alignment and look at those properties, you'll see I get offset parameters tab, and it's populated with information. And finally, the curvature. We get the connection parameters. This is not available in the other ones because I don't have any, and it's the type of curvature. Okay. The other thing which I'll show you before we move on is in the tool space, you can open up the Prospector tab, and in here is listed all of our alignments, all of the entities that we make in Civil 3D typically get listed here. which is quite handy, having the navigation to select objects and zoom to, which is quite a good functionality. So in here we can see we've got a few different entries in here. Centerline alignments lists the alignments that I've made already for this project. Existing Crown Road and Road 1, which is the centre lines of existing Crown Road, which, just to give you some context, is this alignment here. And Road 1 being this alignment here, just so you know what we're talking about when we refer to those alignments. Those are the centre lines, the offset alignments that I've made for those. Both that you can see here, these parameters have been filled in for left and right at 3 metre offset, for Road 1, left and right 3 metre offset. And the curvature, which I've already done, we will be doing another one later on. So this is the connected alignment between existing Crown Road, and I give it the SW for southwest suffix, just so that it's clear. Naming conventions obviously vary office to office and possibly person to person, but it's always a good idea to give your alignments, profiles, surfaces, anything that you're making a descriptive title. Don't just call it curvature, because you might have many in your job. I find it handy to refer to the roads in the intersection and the position in that intersection, and therefore I can find it, and not only yourself, but anyone else who looks at your job who may not be familiar with how you've set it out can easily then reference the objects that you've made. So that's all available here in the Prospector. There are also some styles here in the settings. So when we're making alignments, when you're making your styles, the different styles that are applied can be edited here as well overall, so you don't have to go into individual elements to edit them. You can edit the settings in the Settings tab. All right, so in our alignment creation tools, there's one demo. We're going to make it a center line. Now here we're going to use the alignment style. I'm going to leave all of these as default, just to give you an idea what these are. The alignment style, these are default ones, but you can customize these. Anytime you go to customize anything, I would always recommend creating a copy of a style or an element that looks similar or close to what you're trying to achieve, and then building on that as opposed to starting afresh, because otherwise you'll be making a rod for your own back, having to recreate a lot of the styles that you might have already been happy with. And I find it easier just to change one element at a time, just to make sure that it's changing and having the desired effects. Otherwise you might be making changes and not being aware of what's going to happen at the other end, or not getting a desired result, and just making the changes incrementally. The alignment label set, same as before. You can edit these. I won't be making any changes to this, just to let you know that it is here. If you are going to make changes to the alignment labels, they're categorized, so you can add elements from different categories, be that geometry points, the major minor stations. Stations is what Americans call chainages, if you weren't aware. There's a lot of language similarities, things like we say batter, they say daylight. When we say throughway, we say bitumen, that sort of thing. Obviously, it's in the curve spelling differently. So some of the Americanizations being in Civil 3D, it is American software, so you're going to see curves spelt with a C, CU and things like that, instead of the KERV. So the stations being the chainages. Once you're in a type of label, you can modify the different element within that type. You can see here we've got major minor stations already labeled with the increments. We can edit that here if we wanted to, and the geometry points that we want labeled as well. You can have extra elements in for a design style, and then you can very easily change your alignment style to a version of this, copy it out, call it publish or something like that, and then you can refine that so that you don't get all of these changes that you don't want, and it will only give you the changes that you do want. So you can have two different styles, set one up for your design process, and then with a few clicks you can easily change that style and apply a set out style which is much cleaner and ready for publication. Okay, so we've done our, I'm going to leave all of these as standard. Over in the design criteria, the tab that most people probably ignore unless they're doing a highway. In here, I'll just walk through some of these options. We've got the design speed. We'll change that to 80 k's an hour and apply our design-based criteria. Now, what this is applying, just pull that out. This is applying a design criteria table. I'll click on this ellipsis, and this is the options available. You can see there's a few different ones in here. These are XML files. They're made. I'll just open one in Notepad. So you can see, unless you're a programming genius, you might not want to make any changes in here, but it's just a matter of letting you know that this is the document that it's reading, and these are the elements that contribute to that, to those standards, so that it's relevant to your design. So you know what's contributing when you get the little messages popping up, which we'll see later on. This is the table that it's referring to. And in here, we've got the design checks. Now you can customize these. The one that I want to apply will be basic for urban areas, and we want desirable minimum radius. In case you're not aware, desirable and absolute are different standards that are applied in OSRoads, where you've got absolute settings, which are pretty much what's the difference between safe and unsafe, and desirable, which is the difference between comfortable and uncomfortable. So that's the difference between those, and my advice would be to typically apply desirable settings first, and if you can't achieve that with the site constraints, apply an absolute minimum, and then if you still can't achieve it, either make alterations to the site, and if you can't, then there'll have to be other compensations, like, for example, reducing the speed limit, because everyone follows speed limits, as we know. So you might want to go down that road if you can't achieve the minimum radius, for example. Now, in these, users can edit these. There's only one being applied for this one. So if I go to curve, there's different, same as before, there's different types of design checks. In the curve type, there's a few different options in here. The one that's being applied is desirable minimum arc radius. So you can see here, I've got desirable minimum arc radius available. If I click on it, I can't add it because it's already here. But I could also apply an absolute minimum arc radius and have both of those design checks applying at the same time, and then I'll get error warnings if I don't achieve the desirable. Then obviously I won't be achieving the absolute. I can make edits to my design and then achieve the desirable setting, but not achieve the absolute setting, but not achieve the desirable setting, and then make an educated decision on how I want to alter my design based on that feedback. So we can add those, and we can delete them just by clicking on the remove button. So let's cancel that. So we're going to apply this to our alignment. We've pretty much saturated this document, so I'll click OK. Get down to a bit of space. So there's a few different ways within the alignment tools that you can knock out your alignment. To start off with, there's a quick and dirty method here with the tangent with curves. It's a very simple method. If I click on this ellipsis here, then we can see that we're going to apply, this is just a default setting, and then we can come back through and make edits later on. So for now, we're just going to apply a curve radius of 50. I can change that if I want, and choose the tangent with curves option. And then I can very quickly, press F3, turn off my snap, very quickly make an alignment, and it automatically fillets those for me with a radius. I can select the alignment, come up to open the panorama. I'll just lock that open. So you can see here how it's given me all of these, the different elements in a list, and I can edit some of these parameters depending on what the element is. So you can see we're alternating between lines and curves. And these, by default, it gives you a non-constrained tangent or a line, and a constrained curve. And I'm going to be explaining what these what these phrases mean, because it can be a little bit confusing with the fixed, free and floating description of the different alignment elements. So in a nutshell, when it says fixed, the portion in the brackets, how I like to think of that is fixed by the user. So it's all about the perspective. When it says fixed, it's because the user has fixed the location. When it says free, it's because it's free of the user interaction. So you can see my curves are free of designer interaction. So now these can move freely. If they were floating, then they're bound at one end and floating at the other. So that's basically how you can think of fixed, free and floating elements. I think there was a bit of confusion with this, and that's why they've introduced this further description saying that it's not constrained, even though it says fixed, it might be a bit confusing. It's not constrained by the software, it's fixed by the user. So if it's in the brackets, then it's from a user perspective. If that's a bit clearer than it might have been. Okay, so the next element that we'll do, just moving along the form, we can add IPs, or as another Americanism is calling them PIs. So we can insert PIs mid-block into these elements, and you can see here I've now got 2 line elements. We can make edits to that. Because this arc is free from designer input, it automatically does that connection for me. If I make a change to that and call it fixed, it's now fixed by the user, which is myself. And then I make an edit to this IP or PVI. And you can see now I've lost my tangency because I've overridden that element and changed its tangency constraint. And we'll see these exclamation marks over here on the left telling me that the tangency has been violated. And so you can see that exclamation mark turn up when I make that change. And so there's tangency elements. There's also here my design checks. My minimum radius has also been, has not been achieved. And so we're getting that error as well. So on the left here, these little exclamation marks can tell us which portions or which elements of our design are not conforming with which design parameters that we've set for ourselves. Okay, same as before, we can just delete IPs. We can, I'll just make this one fresh. So that's the automated method where you can just go tangent to curve. Other methods, and we can close that. Other methods using the civil site design tools entirely. This one demo again. Centerline, set design criteria, same as before. Change that to 50 k's an hour. Okay. So we can start here with pretty much these buttons here in this panel. This drop-down deals with the line elements, the curves, and different, there's the spirals and different interactions for the different elements. So they're all grouped together, which can help you work out which one you need to choose. For example, with the 2 fixed lines, because they're fixed, they're going to be set by the user. So I can draw a line element in there, and then I can choose in my arcs drop down, I can choose a floating curve. So I can choose and always keep an eye on the command bar down at the bottom. It's always going to give you helpful instructions as to what you need to do next. So it's asking me which entity to attach to, which will be the alignment or the line that I just drew. It's asking me for a radius. Now you'll notice here it's saying 56. Just bring that number to your attention. As a default, 56. I'm going to say 100 for my radius, less than 180. And because it's floating, this element is bound, but I've got control over this other element with this 100-meter radius. Okay, so you've got a floating curve. the next element we'll add will be a floating line. So over in my lines drop down, I'm going to go from a curve through a point. So I pick my curve and choose my endpoint. Like that. Floating line from a curve through a point. That's one. Specifying the length, we'll go with 100. Okay. So we can specify the length. We can also, the different grips that appear give us a different outcome. So here we can modify our radius being fixed. And here we can modify our length being floating. And the next element we'll draw will be, we'll put in another line, but this one we won't attach. So it's just going to be fixed by the user. And I'm going to draw this one, which will be not connected. And we'll just look at our panorama again. You'll see there's only 3 elements listed, even though I've drawn the 4th element because it's not connected. It works from the origin forwards. And so from here, we can add a floating curve between 2 elements. We'll go with less than 180. And for this one, I'm going to put in 50 meters. So this 56 pops up again as the default, and I'm going to put in 50 meters. And so we've got a curve here with the radius of 100 and a curve here with the radius of 50 as they're listed. And I can select these and they'll illuminate or highlight in the plan view, which is very helpful when you've got a whole bunch of them in a long design. And so with this curve, we've got this radius here. Now I deliberately chose a number above and below that 56 because if I hover over this exclamation mark, what we're told of in the warning is that we've not achieved our minimum radius, which should be 56, which we set in our design standards. And so that is in the design criteria, which we can look at in the editor. So design criteria that we applied to this alignment was for the minimum radius. And in the desirable table, we can see for a 50k an hour speed, we have a minimum radius to achieve as 56. So if our design has a radius less than 56, our options are to increase the radius or to change the speed, reduce the speed. Okay. We can delete elements individually, so I can just choose that and it will remove that arc for me. And then I can put in a free spiral between 2 entities. It's asking me if it's an in curve or an out curve. That determines the bias of the curvature. And I'm just going to let that be 25. And so we can see we've got our spiral here. On a side note, Osroads has commentary regarding spirals saying that as a motorist drives along, the spiral introduces the curve gradually and incrementally. And it's not obvious when a motorist is driving along that the road has started turning, and they tend to understeer the road and then realise that it's turning and then overcorrect. And so there's commentary on that regarding the application of spirals. And the preference would be to apply a curve simply because it's clear that the road has now started turning, and then a motorist can start the turning manoeuvre rather than being surprised by the road changing direction unexpectedly. Even though there is a small amount of time that it takes a motorist to turn the wheel. If you've ever used auto turn, auto track software, there's a time it takes to go from lock to lock. And so the vehicle will take time to go from turning straight or not turning to the turning along the radius, but that's less of an issue than a motorist not being aware that the rotor started turning. So in this situation, it's recommended that we use a curve, and so we would use the fixed curve radius option. Select the two entities, less than 180, and we'll just let it use its 56 as a minimum. All right, the other element that we're going to show you will be best fit. So for this one, I'm going to do, I might do a best fit in the arc, so we'll remove that one again. Now this one, truth be told, I've never had to use this one on a project, but a possible application could be if you're trying to find a gap that won't be challenged by site constraints, by site objects. So what we're going to do is just go by clicking on the screen. I'm going to apply a curve and just put entities in here. Now, if you had an aerial photo in the background, you can choose these as tree elements. And what will be ideal here, even though this weighting here can be applied as it's trying to find the best fit, I might actually use an end one, which might be a better fit for this exercise. I'll just let that go. These are also listed when they're joined, so you can click on the ellipsis. I'm just going to remove some of these options, and what we'll do is we'll apply a floating at the end in a curve format. Floating curve best fit. Clicking on the screen, and we can apply elements. And you'll see this curve taking shape as I click. And so we can include or exclude these elements. As I select one, it will exclude it and find the best fit. Now, if these were trees on a site, what you can do is give them a weighting. And so, for example, these were trees and I want to avoid, for example, this tree is quite significant. So I can apply weighting to that, and if I reduce the weighting, it'll actually move the design away from that element. So if I use the weighting in reverse, it will apply less of a weighting and move the design away from that element, and vice versa. If I thought that I wanted my alignment to be closer to one object but further away from another, then you can increase these values and it will make the weighting of the bias different. So by increasing that to 2, it moves closer to that element. So you can use this tool to both avoid and attract the alignment to different objects. So that might be useful in an environment where there's site constraints like trees and things like that. Okay. That's been applied, and we can re-access those elements with this ellipsis here. This is just for this specific curve. So we can access that again. It opens up this tab on the side here. So our alignment entities exist here, and here's our regression data, as it's called, but it's basically how we're going to navigate through those site constraints. There's also, you can also access all of the regression data up here in this button here. We can select an element, which is really handy for really long projects where this list can be quite massive, and rather than trying to work out which element has which constraints being applied, you can choose an element using the picker, and then it comes up with all of the relevant information for that particular element. So if we wanted to, we can select the different alignment elements. Okay. So unlike other projects, we can use these undo and redo commands. So if there was something that I did, I can undo that, and it just keeps a track of our edits. I find this method to be a bit more difficult using the Civil 3D tools, unless there's a specific application, for example, the pick path. So another method which users will be familiar with is to draw a polyline in AutoCAD. We have the most powerful, one of the most powerful drafting packages in the world in AutoCAD. So we can use its full functionality, drawing lines as a polyline, and then A for arc to start drawing arcs, and then L for line and deliberately not achieving tangency. And so I'm just going to stretch that out a bit, make that a bit longer. And I can use the fillet command and specify the radius. Let's see if we get 100 to fit in there. So fillet radius, we'll go 50. And so that guarantees that I have a tangency between this arc and this line, or tangent as it's called. And clearly here I don't have tangency on purpose. And so in the alignments drop down here, I can come and just create alignment from objects. So I have a lot of drafting functionality in AutoCAD, and then I can just turn that into an alignment. It's asking me the direction, so it'll prompt you with an arrow. I can click OK on that and give it a name, a different type. And there's more functionality in here where I can apply this. Let's change that to 50 again. Turn it on. And we can apply a different alignment style now. By default, it's got this alignment style of offset. And it's asking me, do I want to replace all of my apply tangents between my curve returns? I don't want to do that, and I will erase the existing entities. So we'll click OK. And I now have an alignment listed in my tool space. My alignments, it's a centerline alignment using the properties, using the offset style. You'll notice that it doesn't have the exclamation mark pointing out my lack of tangency, which we introduced deliberately. And the reason for that is that this offset style isn't showing the warning symbol here. So I'm editing the object style, not the type, but the style. And in the offset style, the warning symbol is disabled. If I change that to the centerline type, for example, and click apply, we now get minimum radius and lack of tangency error warnings. And if I want to create a style that doesn't have those pop up for production, then I can just simply disable those here and not see it. It doesn't make my design safe suddenly. It just means that I'm not seeing the warnings. Okay.
Terry.
Yes.
There's just a quick point about disabling the warnings entirely for the alignment rather than the just in the alignment properties. Having the option to be able to disable it for just that particular alignment rather than the style. For example, with that one, you might have been, entirely happy for the warning symbols to be on there, but you're not fussed about having any design checks happening. But if you can just pop to the alignment properties for that particular alignment, it was just discussion on the design, the constrained editing, design criteria tab at the top.
Yep.
And just down the bottom there, just mentioning about the fact that, you can just turn it off entirely. So leave the checking, and when you do want to come back and check it again, just in case, some of you are wondering.
Absolutely. So you can determine individually for each different alignment whether you want to apply the design criteria and see the different checks. And then you can always come back through later on individual alignments and just disable that check, and you won't get the error warnings either, because it's no longer applying the check to that alignment specific to the alignment with the design criteria being added. It's unique to this alignment.
We've got a question just in regards to, it's a privately asked question, which is in respect of if you get the alignment direction wrong the first time round.
Yep, so you can come into your alignment and go into the geometry editor and reverse the direction. Sub-entity.
Terry, I'll step on your toes on this one. You can do it to the entire alignment, but try to do it before you do a vertical design. There'll be lots of warnings. But if you click on the alignments right now, Terry.
Yeah.
If you drop down modify in the context sensitive ribbon that turns up, it's hidden in there.
You can reverse the direction of the entire alignment.
Yeah, that'll do all entities at once.
It's one of those little bizarre ones where it's been put in such a special location that, yeah, for some reason, it just happens to be on a modifier rather than in a sort of logical place. It's tucked away there. But thanks for Terry. That's answered that question.
Yeah, so definitely it would probably make sense, to be perfectly honest, if you had reverse individual entities and a drop down as they have with the rest of these buttons to have the reverse direction for the entire set available here. But yes, so you can still navigate the alignment. Obviously changing directions, and as Shane, my colleague, says, you get a lot of error warnings. It's certainly not ideal to make that change last minute. Like after you have a vertical profile designed, you really want to have the horizontal elements sorted out as much as possible before you start making drastic changes. It's certainly the cause of a lot of error messages if you start, especially editing around the beginning. Changing those changes can have a knock-on effect. So certainly ideal to have that set up prior to moving on to the vertical element, which is where we're up to now. So we've triggered our violations for the tangencies, etc. So we're happy with our design, even with this kink in our horizontal alignment. And so we can create a surface profile in our profiles drop-down. And now in here, I'll just go through this form and step through some of the controls. So we're creating a surface profile. We've got a drop-down as to which alignment we want to apply it to. As I said at the beginning, a profile, profiles belong to alignment, so you want to make sure that the profile type and method that you attain it are relevant to the alignment that you're using. So for this one, I'm going to select the alignment that we've just made called Demo. We can choose, of all of our surfaces available in the project will be listed here. I only have the survey or the natural surface available, and I click on the add button to add that to our set. Now we can choose the changes. These are pick boxes, so you can sample not for the full length. I'm going to leave that as is, but you can adjust that. You can also sample offsets, and you can apply an offset to your centerline sampling. So I could add a 3 meter sampling and a -3 meter sampling, and I can add those as well, and they're listed here. Anytime you put one in that you don't want, you select it and you can just click the remove button, but you can certainly include extra sampling based on the alignment that you've got, and just toggle that on and off with the tick box. Okay, so we're going to create our profile, which is a surface profile. I'll step through some of these commands as well. You can just next. Once you've got a style or a setup that you're happy with, you can just go straight to create profile view. I'm just going to step through some of these. So here's our profile view name. By default, it gives us the ls prefix, and then it gives it a counter. And we've got this parameter button here on the right. And so what we'll see here, there's a few more options where I can include, for example, if I come back, I don't want the counter. In fact, I don't even want it to say ls. I just want it to say, give me the parent alignment, and I'm going to say long section. I got that prefix in there as well. So I can give it the long section, and then insert that in space. So I'm going to long section and then the parent name, and it's basically going to give me it's going to populate that field for me. The incremental number here is relating to the next counter here. So I can change that number to being wherever I want that to start, and then the increment for the next one. I don't need to worry about that because I'm not including that field. So click OK on that. So this will be my naming convention that I'm applying. The style which I'm going to apply for the view, we're going to have a look at that in a minute when we output it. Step 3, station range, we can make changes to this with the profile view height. But it comes up with an automatic setting. Sometimes in this vertical curve, there'll be the extension of the tangent lines, and that grip can sometimes be off the scope of the view because it's limiting it to the data, not the elements that make it. And so sometimes it may be required for you to override that. You can just use the user specified values, and you can make adjustments to that if required. Here you can override that automatic setting. With our profile view display, this will be extremely relevant later on when we're doing an offset alignment. We want to make sure that we're getting that in our data as well. Data bands. This is a source of a lot of time spent, a lot of effort spent trying to make a profile look the way people want it to look. I'm going to change this from surfaces only to, for example, this is the default highway design. I haven't made any changes to this. You'll see that I have a custom one that I've made called Cut and Fill, which actually started with this one. But I'm just going to use the default one to give you an idea on what you can get straight out of the box, and then how much you might want to edit that and how you can do that. So for the highway design, I can click on this edit button and we can customize that in this form here. We're going to output it first and then come back and have a look at this in a minute. Okay, specifically for this portion here, a lot of American style long sections will have the data on the top. It's typical in Australia that we have the data on top and bottom. For us, we have the data at the bottom. So you can change where that data is going to appear. You can apply a hatch to the different sections. I won't be doing that today, but it can be applied here depending on which you want to apply between the different surfaces or the different profiles. It doesn't have to be a surface, it can just be a profile and a surface. And the different elements will have a different symbol and be a different source. So it can either be a surface profile or a profile that's come from your design. So we'll click in our Create Profile view, find some space down the bottom. Now immediately you can see I've got some elements here on the side, and it's shunted all of my data across, all except for the design level. And at this point you'll be thinking, what a mess, I should have been a doctor instead. But all it's doing is sampling the surface. Because we haven't made a design yet, it's just sampling the surface and getting each change of grade and applying that and giving us a sample for that section. So we can fix that when we go back into the properties. First thing I'm going to do is to create a profile. So I select my profile, it comes up with the contextual ribbon. I'm going to click the profile creation tools. Now this is going to create a profile for the alignment of demo. You see how that's pre-populated for me. It must belong to an alignment. Again, I can customize my titling. By default, it gives me this design. I like that, but this counter portion I don't, so I'm just going to remove that up here. And in the sample surface name or the profile type, you can put in different entries in here. I'm going to go with the alignment name, click Insert, and click OK. So now I've got the design of, and then the alignment. And so I've got the design of demo, and that will be in contrast to the survey surface. We also have design criteria options in here. We've already run through that for the horizontal elements. These are very similar for the vertical elements. You can add these vertical crest lengths, for example, and we can, as before, we can customize those. So we can apply curve, vertical curve length between the crest. There's sometimes options in there. And in the edits in here, you can customize these. Go back down. You can customize these variables in here. Now, what this is doing is applying an if-then-or statement, similar to what you find in Excel or any logical argument. It's an if, and in brackets, the design speed equals 110, then apply a vertical curve length of 100, less than or greater than 150. It must apply that. It must apply, or it must qualify for that result, and then the comma. And then after that comes the or statement, which is the next line. So if this condition, then this, else. If this condition, then this, else. And it repeats as we work down the design speeds until we reach the design speed. If it's less than a certain speed, then you're going to have a certain profile length required. And here are all the closed brackets from all the open brackets that we had here. So it's basically all of these elements in the one logical argument. So that's how these are put together. I'm not going to apply that for this one. And I can change my labeling in here. I'll leave that as is for now, click OK. Now, as soon as I get into this form, the first thing I like to do is create a new IP, or PVI as they call it. I'll turn F3 to turn my snaps on. Put one at the start and one at the end. The reason why I do that is so I've got control and I've got an object I can select. Even if I don't want my data to go all the way to the end, what this does is by default it ties into the surface, the natural surface, which is most commonly what you want to do. It gives me data that I can manipulate straight away. But if you happen to close that, it's very difficult to come back and try and select the profile because it doesn't exist on the screen. So draw something so that it exists, and then you can come back through and add elements as required. Just do a fudge design. So I've just added some PVIs. We can also delete them and move them if we want. A good tool to use while you're manipulating a design is to have the profile view open and have the grid open in the panorama, so you can select your IPs, and if I find one on the screen, zoom out a bit. So as I select these, it will mark my position in the profile view. I can use the tools similar to the horizontal tools, the vertical tools here. I can add straights. Typically what you want to do in here is add a vertical curve. Unlike the horizontal section where it's recommended to use the circular portion, for this I would recommend using a parabola option because it gradually increases the curve as opposed to immediately. The reason why I would choose this one and not circular is because gravity is constant and you're always going to have that force applied, whereas driver attention in the horizontal version is not always being applied. So we apply the parabola version, and I can just select the first and second entity. I select my pass-through width. This is going to be very tight, so 40 was probably going to make my next vertical curve be very difficult. But you can just come through here and make edits directly to the elements. And I can just repeat that process And make that one 20 as well. This one, I'll be a lot more generous. And I can make that one probably 10 I've got. Didn't get the last 0. But yeah, it's like I say, you can just make edits directly to the form. Another useful tool in this is not just for your vertical curves, but for the tangents themselves. And so I like to have this open so I can see the grades in and grades out. And especially for a flat element, you won't want to have your road, specifically if it's a road, you won't want to have a road design that's too flat, otherwise you'll struggle with the drainage. So we can find the grade across, click our element, highlights it for us, and what we want to do is make sure that that's not too flat. So for example, I wouldn't want to make that any flatter than 0.5%, or minus 0.5% in this case. Anything flatter than that and you'll struggle, I think, with the drainage in your design, so you can certainly achieve your design minimums in this portion. It does also give you feedback on the K values for vertical curves, which you can apply, probably very relevant for a highway design.
Terry.
Yes.
Just got an interesting question about, the user's basically talking about locking the point to horizontal or vertical movement. So you and I would be familiar with moving an IP just left and right, or along grade, or up and down only. You're aware of any facility that would allow that to happen within the actual profile view?
So if I understand the question correctly, you're asking how can you can adjust this using these grips. You can free hand it.
And I suppose using ortho would be the solution, really. Obviously you can move it left and right, moving up and down. Yeah, insofar as
well, yeah. So there's other tools available. So obviously there's the free move, but rather than just doing it on the screen, you can also use the tool here, raise and lower PVIs. You can also grab the grip. You'll notice that I have I push F10 to toggle it on and off. My polar, I always have this on my polar snap. What I find with this is it's not as restrictive as the ortho setting, because once you've got ortho on, you're locked into the 90-degree options. But with this one, I've got a semi-automatic, or a semi-snap, for lack of a better word, where I can choose. I've got it set currently to 45 degrees. So if I want a 45-degree adjustment, then I can use that. But I've also got the vertical adjustment, and I've got that snap as well. So I can control my vertical movement. It's free in CAD. And just on that, you also have these other grips where I can manually adjust the vertical curve length just by sliding that up and down, because it's free. And the other one that I'll show you is these grips here, these triangle grips that point off in the direction of the tangents that are applying. So if I want to maintain that 0.5%, which has been changed now to 1%, I'm just going to make that -1. So I can lock that in at -1%, and I can click on the triangle and it locks that trajectory in. I can't go any further because I'm too close to the next vertical curve. But I can maneuver this IP and I've still got my 1%. So I've got both constraints, self-imposed constraints in the vertical if I choose, as well as in the at grade options as well.
While you're making that edit, Terry, questions come in about whether or not we get any visual cues or trackers on the plan view whilst we're making edits within the profile view. So similar to what we've seen on.
When we get to a bit more complicated or vertical grading later on, we can do this now. What you can do is split the view. Just makes a bit of room for myself.
If it's something you're going to cover later, Terry, we can cover it later. It's just want to make sure that it was a pretty good question. So if we're going to do split view, then we'll cover that when we get to it. So as long as the person is aware that's what's going to happen.
It is on the list, but I'll click on this minus, just set it up now. So for two, you can have two, set up your views, click on the minus, follow the flyout, horizontal, vertical. You can configure those yourself as well. So I'm going to split my view in half, make this the active viewport, and I can see my plan view here. And now I'm a bit busy down here, so I'll just minimize that. Make the bottom window the active window, and then I can change that view there. And I can select the profile. Select the profile, and I choose the vertical lines, not the profile itself. And I've got this station tracker option. I can click that, drop down, and I just click all viewports. And so now when I move along, I have a tracker that follows my position in both the plan and the profile view. It always comes in with a really big section width, so you can customize that here in the options. And typically I set these widths to 20 or something a bit more sensible, and now I've got just a little marker telling me where I'm up to. So you've got those options as well. You can just drag this if you want to adjust the bias on the fly, so you can have a big plan view and vice versa. You can configure those views however you want. Mostly useful when you're doing, or also useful when you're doing things like vertical curves, which we'll get to in our curve returns later on.
Thanks, Terry. That's answered the. That's definitely answered the question. Thank you.
All right. So we've made our surface profile. Now, I'll just go back to the single view. So come back to our views, go to single. As I work my way along with this vertical element, you can edit PVIs over a range and make edits. So I can choose a station range. I can raise the whole design, it's varied, or I can edit them just between particular changes and then choose an elevation, both positive and negative, and make adjustments that way if I have a numeric value specifically that I want to achieve. It also means that I don't have to individually grab different elements. Okay, currently we're designing using a, just bring that up and expand that out. We're currently using a PVI point of view where we're editing the PVIs. You can design by entities. As before, this is basically dealing with the lines as opposed to an IP that the line joins into. And so here you can edit the line specifically, not the point that combines the two, vertical curves, different elements. You'll notice that these are grayed out because they are fixed, and basically because those points are fixed by me, I can't edit that line, but the free elements are available to be edited, such as this vertical curve is free, and therefore I can make edits to the vertical curve length. And that's an entity-based design, so you can access that as well. Most commonly, you would use the PVI-based options, and then you're moving the PVIs and letting the line work create itself automatically. You can delete elements individually if you wanted to have breaks in your vertical curve. If you're doing an alignment where you don't want it to be sampled, I would recommend leaving the line joined and then just making the not using it as a target in your corridor, which we covered later on in different web session. But there are other ways to exclude data other than deleting the element. But you can always remove those elements individually as well. As before, we've got our undo redo commands. And with that, I'm going to close my panorama and I'm going to accept that as my design. Now, with this view, that's coming in quite poorly because you've got all of these data being reviewed. Now, with these drop downs, there's a few options up here. You can edit the profile properties. This is for the profile itself. And there's the profile view properties, which is for the profile, the box that it sits on. So you can change the properties and the styles and how the lines themselves appear of the profiles, the different profiles. And what I want to do here is to change the profile view properties. You can also change the style, which will give you different options regarding the way the lines look as opposed to which lines are being shown. So in here, we're using the data bands. Now, what I want to do here, let's just say for argument's sake, I want to Now we've got our profile. I want to now change this profile 1 from the natural surface. I want to show that as I'll import the data set. We'll use the roads one, highway design. And we'll apply that. And I'm just going to OK and get a better view so we can try and see everything that's coming in, hopefully a bit more clearly, see the changes as we make them. So I've selected my profile and I can click on the view properties. Okay, so we'll import the data set from the highway design. We'll click OK on that and we click apply. So we're going to get different elements in here. Some of these we don't want, so we'll get rid of that geometry. We can delete them. We can change the order that they appear. So for my super elevation data, we don't want that. What we do want to add in our profile data, we can have the different elements in here. We can add surfaces. We can have different elements. What we've got now available though is profile number 1, which we can change to our design. So I would suggest changing these to design so that you don't get it reading the geometry points for the natural surface, which will include the grade breaks. And that's why we're getting all of these points, because it's reading the natural surface grade breaks and giving us sampling for each one of those points. Other changes in here, like I said, we can change the order in which they occur, just using these up and down arrows. And we've got our depth in here now. By default, these came in, we'll just click apply on that. Now, by default, these came in, and I've changed these already, these styles, but you can change these here for the style. There's this box here, which you can edit in the existing level. Click on the edit button, compose the label. Now, all of these were set to profile data, and I've changed these to existing level. To change the text in these sort of elements, you click on the ellipsis, you click on the location within the data that you want to bring in, and you would click the bump in button. So you would choose the element that you wanted to push in, and then you can bump that in, and it would put in a field. For example, if I had parent alignment, I can bump that in, and in my title, it will give me the parent alignment existing level. And that's how you can add information. Some of it automated, you can also just type that in. How this is positioned within the field, the anchor point, initially this is coming in at the front, which was middle right, so I changed that to middle left, and you can maneuver the anchor the point. Don't forget to also change the attachment of the text, so that if it moves that anchor point, which is currently here, to here, then the text will also start reading out inside your data, so you would want to flip that around as well. Okay.
Now, Terry, just while you're finishing up, folks, I appreciate that we are just over the hour mark, but as you can see, there's so much great content that Terry's been able to cover. Please bear in mind that the recording will be on the YouTube channel, so if you do have to drop out, obviously we don't want to see that happen, but it will be available on the YouTube channel, and just to make sure that everyone's aware that that'll be happening. Thanks, Terry.
No worries. So we'll get a wriggle on so we can try and get a bit more information in for people. So with this import data set, so I've made some of these changes. I won't go through them all now. We can just go straight to the one that I've made called cut and fill. Import that data set and click apply. And so what this is doing is sampling, because I've changed that data set. So what we want to do is just make sure that this profile is reading the design profile. Important to note that our cut fill, it explains it here, P1 minus P2, so that's this profile minus this profile, giving us our cut and fill value. So our cut and fill now populated here, design levels, existing levels, and that was just a version of the highway design set, which I customized and made it a bit neater so we can see what's going on. Okay, so now that we've got our alignment and our profile, we have a horizontal and a vertical element. So what we can do is create that offset. So here in the alignment options, we had to have created our vertical element first so that we can bring that across to our offset. So we can create an offset alignment, select the host alignment or the parent alignment, brings up this format. It gives us the name. Again, with these parameters, I'm going to leave that all as default. We're going to offset one offset. You can have multiple and specify the offset distance. There's defaults here for the styles which we've been through, so we'll leave them all as is. The widening criteria, you can customize that again with the design checks. What I want to bring your attention to is creating the offset profile. You can toggle this on or off. You can just offset the alignment without the profile if you want. Toggle that off. I want the profile to come with it at that grade. Now, what's important here is that you make sure that you tick this on. By default, I think that should always be on, but I guess you'd have to choose which one you want. Turn that on, and if you don't want it to show in your profile view, you can always just disable it. It's much harder to bring it in after it's been made. So definitely turn that on. Have that set to -3. Again, it's going to have all these preset naming conventions. I don't need to make changes to those. So I've got those and click OK. It's given me this these offset alignments, and that's interactive, so I can make edits to that alignment and it will take those with me. That's the polyline that was left behind. We can get rid of that now. Okay, I've also got in my profile view the design, but I've also got the two offsets. These are on top of each other for the -3%. So I've got the right and the left, both being available for selection and in here. Okay. And widening. So we can widen offset alignment. We can also add a widening to an alignment. Do I want to make a new alignment? No. We're going to edit this one. Select the start station. I'm going to go with 20, and the end station I'm going to make as 60. The offset widening. This is from the centerline, the parent. So if I leave it at 3, it will stay at that 3 meter width. So what I want to change that to is we'll use 6. And section must be too close. Let's try that again. So we'll create a widening. The start station, we want that to be 30. End station, we'll make that as 60. So widening at 6. I don't know why that's not coming in. Try this side. Add a widening. Okay, an unexpected result there. What we can do is come up to this one, which I've done before. You do a widening, and then you would click on the offset parameters. And what we've got here is different options for managing that widening. So you would click, so here I specified the chainage start station at being 148. I actually drag these up. Once you've made your widening, you can manipulate it graphically using the grips. Different grips have different controls. So you can drag this offset segment, get your start and end. You can manipulate those. You can also do it graphically or in the panel here, changing the length, changing it to 3. So what's interesting about these is you can have a linear widening, or you can also have a curve line curve. These are quite cool, these options here, where you can have a linear version or curve line curve, where that widens out using, and it makes available curve options. I've used a 7 meter curve and then a 7 meter curve to return it. So you can manage those controls to give you a widening with curve entries and exits, or linear curve entry and exits. All of your widenings can be listed and stepped through if there's more than one widening available. For this one, there's just this one, so I'm happy with that widening. The next element is the curve return. Again, in the alignments, and you can see how the alignments and the profiles are linked, and the sequence isn't necessarily alignment then profiles. You have to do alignment sometimes, create a profile, offset that, and then come back to alignments. I'm going to create a connected alignment. For this exercise, I'll choose this one, this alignment here, the second element. And the location of my automation. So you can see how with these crossing alignments, there's pretty much 4 options. It asks you where to click. So I click on this, the northwest corner. I'm happy with that location, so I push enter. Again, it names it for me. I'll leave that as is. Curve radius defaults to 250 meters for some reason, which is unrealistic. So we're going to go with curve radius of 10. The sampling overlap, I can change that. I'll use 10 on this one. And again, with the labeling conventions. And now over this, for this connected alignment, you have a unique tab where you can optionally create a profile. Yes, I want to create a profile from the incoming profiles, and I can name those here. It's defaulted these from the alignments that I chose for the horizontal elements. So it populates that for you, but you can override those if you want. Bring in a profile from a different location. And I'll click OK on that, and it will give us our profile here. Now you can just select that and bang out a profile view, but I like to have the surface in my profile. So I'm going to create a surface profile again, and I'm going to select, I can use the screen picker if I want, instead of a list. So it's connected alignment 2 because I didn't give it a name. The surface I want to include will be the natural surface. And you can see here how I've got different types, have different symbology. It also gives me a description of what they are. So this is the connected alignment, which has both elements of horizontal and vertical in the symbol, and this is my surface in the profile. I can draw in the profile view. Same as before, you can make edits to these. We've been through these ones already. I won't mess with the data bands, we've covered that. And I can just go straight to create profile view. Pop that off to the side next to the other one that I've already done. So at this point, I would split the screen, go back in a horizontal, I should do it vertically this time. Make this one the current one. So I've got a nice view of my profile, and I can also see where I'm up to with my marker. So it works in both windows. I can see where I'm up to in the plan view, and conversely in the profile view. And here, right click and go to edit profile geometry, and add an IP. Now, because we've got incoming and outgoing data, these you can adjust this sampling of the road coming in, and this portion in here, you can apply edits in between these two here. You can see here on my changes where I changed the sampling to 10 meters, so 0 to 10, it sampled that off the incoming alignment. And from this one, it's 25 through to 35, so 10 meters on both sides. Because I'm in AutoCAD, I can draft locations in.
I suppose it's fair to say, Terry, that the designing the vertical design on top of the curve return alignment there with reverse curves is pretty much a manual process, like what you're showing, isn't it?
The design of the reverse curves?
Yeah.
For this alignment here?
Well, sorry, as in the vertical design for your curve return, the incoming and outgoing grades being either a single vertical curve or reverse curves. The process of designing that the vertical geometry, unfortunately, is a relatively manual process.
I'm doing this manually. There were parabola settings before, but they seem to be unreliable. Let's put it that way. So, so I believe that it's supposed to be able to be automated, but it doesn't come through for these. So, yeah, to be honest, I like, and frankly, most designers want to have control over, you know, the design of the that element anyway. So even if it was brought in automatically, you would want to know where this low point is going to be, in this case, the high point.
Of course.
But if this was a low point here, you would manage that as a designer. You would want to come in and customize that anyway. You can see on this version here, the one that I did earlier, where I've got that, this is what you're referring to with the reverse curves, where you apply an IP and another IP and bring those curves in towards each other. If this was a low point that had a valley, I would need to manage where that low point occurred, and then I would want to add those IPs in myself, as well as what radius that I put on that vertical curve. So again, in here, for this one, so that. So for this editor, profile the geometry, bring that up, and want to change these ones are grayed out because they're automated, and I can change my add a vertical curve on that. We use a promo for that profile and the profile. We'll make it 5 meters. Okay. Delete my elements. And we can customize that. So now we have a 5 meter vertical curve, and I can make adjustments to that manually. I can tweak that. Obviously, I don't want to have that non-tangential behavior because you'll end up with a kick. You see how it hinges here. This is being brought in from the side alignment. Let's make a zoom here. And so you don't want to have that, or that element can't be edited because it's been governed by this one. You can adjust that on the fly with the slider, and so you can make those adjustments. But yeah, you would want this to be tangential so you don't get a jump in your design. Okay. So that's a connected alignment. I'll just come out of this. Actually, I'll leave this in. We're going to make a polyline and draft across our design. Now, there's no surface here because we haven't turned it into a corridor and extracted a surface out yet. So I only have one surface, but on this alignment, I can just draw a polyline. In the profiles drop down, I can click on a quick profile and select all the surfaces. I only have one surface, but you could individually choose which surface you want. Click OK. I'm going to come over to this view here. And so I have a profile view, and with my marker on, what's that? My marker on, I can see where I'm up to. And now what I can do is with the road design of our demo, which is down here, I can do a profile and superimpose that profile. I can choose the source profile, and I want the center line. So I'll grab this center line and choose the destination, and I can choose that. Yeah, it brings up options regarding the extent, start and end, and the accuracy because it's superimposing it. So I click OK on that, and didn't get a profile, which is unexpected. Can bring that profile in as a superimposed profile. The point here is that it would be static. If I move this line, which is my sampling line for my quick profile, the surface is updating, as you can see. But an superimposed profile is a static, not a dynamic profile. All right, the last option here is creating a profile from a corridor. That will be covered at a later date in the corridors webinar. So stay tuned for that. That brings me to the end of my script. I think I've gone a little bit over time anyway, so hopefully I didn't drag on too much and there was enough content in there for people to appreciate the time that they've spent.
That's great. Thank you very much, Terry. I'm just going to be sharing my screen. So apologies, you may now see just a little bit of a blink on the screen just while we exchange back to me again. And we'll just pop this on. So hopefully all of you are now seeing that final slide. Thanks ever so much for those of you that have popped questions into the Q&A panel during the webcast. We've tried to answer them, as many of those as possible. Just due to time, we will finish off. There is a recording that will be available on our YouTube channel in the next 24 to 48 hours. Any other webcasts that we've got going for this month can be found on our LinkedIn page. If you just search for Civil Service Solutions, you'll find us there. And we've got a couple of very exciting webcasts coming up. One next week, which is to show you how you can create a lot of this Civil 3D content, profiles and corridors, etc., from civil site design. And then we're actually going to have a Civil 3D Corridors 101, which is really going to be an extension of what Terry has been doing today. So if you're able to make those, have a look at the LinkedIn page for registrations and look out for the email newsletters as well. On that, I'd like to say thank you very much, Terry. Very, very thorough, huge amount of content to try and whittle through in a single webcast. So thank you very much.
Oh, good, mate. I wasn't sure you're handing over to me.
Sorry, yes, your prompt. Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webcast. Thanks, Terry.
All good. Thanks, guys.